This week we're going to be talking about Blue Eye Samurai, Netflix's recent animated series from Amber Nazumi and Michael Green. If you haven't seen the show already, we recommend pausing this video, going off and watching it right now. It's only 8 episodes long, and it's gorgeous to look at. This video will contain spoilers for the season, so just to flag that in advance. Also, it's worth noting that last week we talked about Godzilla as a monster that existed in both a Japanese and an American context. It's interesting that we're revisiting this theme this week when we talk about Blue Eye Samurai. While the two subjects are arguably thematically interlinked and closely related, this isn't something that we plan to do in advance. I should be clear here, I'm not an expert in Japanese culture. I've just read a couple of books on Japanese film and watched a lot of the classics of Japanese cinema. I'm not presenting myself as an expert here, just somebody who loves film and has done a bit of research on the topic. With that in mind, let's cut to the chase. Blue Eye Samurai, Netflix's recent animated series from Amber Nazumi and Michael Green, is an interesting study in cross-cultural pollination. This is reflected in the production. Nazumi and Green are a husband and wife team working in Hollywood. Blue Eye Samurai is an American production with a largely Asian American cast, animated by a French-Canadian company. Indeed, its most prominent white cast member is Kenneth Branagh, starring as the villain. Green had served as writer on Branagh's Poirot movies, and I suspect he signed up as quickly as you could say, "Yes, Kenneth, you can do a funny accent."
I hate painting.
Just a quick sidebar here to note that despite Branagh's avowed love of big, broad accents, Fowler is actually Northern Irish, and so speaks with the accent that Branagh would have heard a lot when he was growing up. As somebody who lives close to the border with Northern Ireland, it's a pretty convincing accent. So I want to apologize for that quick drive-by, and extremely quick sidebar. The show is not only indebted to Japanese samurai movies, but to the wave of American pop culture inspired by those films. Nazumi cites Quentin Tarantino's Kill Bill as a major influence on the show. The premiere even features a montage set to battle without honor or humanity, made famous by its inclusion in Kill Bill. However, this cultural overlap is also written into the show itself. The show derives its title from its lead character, Mizu. Mizu is a young warrior, the child of a Japanese mother and a European father. Blue Eye Samurai unfolds against the backdrop of Edo period Japan, when the country had closed its borders to the west. Mizu has identified the only 4 white men who were in Japan at the time of her conception, and dedicates herself to hunting them down and killing them. Mizu's blue eyes mark her as different from other Japanese people, and she's frequently dehumanized, often identified as it or that.
You dead-eyed, half-blooded demon bastard! You look like an unreal!
Mizu's background is a source of shame to her in a culture that values purity. This is a show about characters trying to navigate a world that imposes rigid boundaries between insiders and outsiders. Mizu's heritage is not the only source of such conflict. She presents as male to the outside world because that's the only way to accomplish what she sets out to do. There's a sense in which Mizu's gender is treated as a twist, revealed to the audience as the cliffhanger to the first episode.
Peaches.
Mizu's not the only character facing this struggle. Princess Akemi resists her father's attempts to marry her off. She seeks freedom in a different way than Mizu.
This is the world. It grants women a fixed number of paths, proper wife or improper whore.
The idea that there's only a fixed number of paths for women to follow is literalized through the show's repeated emphasis on the 12 and 20 positions, sexual positions that wives are expected to master in order to pleasure their husbands.
Wife should be familiar with the 12. The 20 are for professionals, but you're marrying into the shogunate, so...
Throughout Blue Eye Samurai, characters try to navigate a world that restricts their options and their choices. Ringo, an enthusiastic noodle chef with no hands who serves as Mizu's apprentice against her better judgment, talks about the challenges of trying to pursue greatness in such confines.
As it says, there are 4 paths through the world: the way of the farmer, the artisan, the merchant, and the warrior.
This seems like a very narrow and restrictive way of looking at things. Blue Eye Samurai is a personal project for Nazumi and Green. The title derives from Green's nickname for their daughter, who was born 15 years ago. The story reflects Nazumi's experiences as a Japanese American, feeling like an outsider at home for not being seen as white, and then going to Japan and feeling like an outsider and being seen as not Japanese enough. The show's Chinese American director, Jane Wu, could relate to that. So here, I'm the Chinese girl, and when I go back home, I'm the American girl. Blue Eye Samurai is a show about what it is to be both Asian and American. Although the series is set in feudal Japan, it resonates outside that specific context. In the past few years, America's become increasingly isolationist and closed off from the rest of the world, like the Edo period Japan depicted in the show. Even beyond that, racism directed at Asian Americans has increased dramatically in the past few years. The show's setting feels like a way to engage with these anxieties through metaphor. As Nazumi explains, and it's worth pausing here to note that while Mizu does mean water in Japanese, it is also an anagram of the final 4 letters of Nazumi's surname, the show derived from feeling stuck between 2 worlds. As she put it, what if we put those feelings into a world in Japan where the borders were closed, where it was so homogenous, and that era is still heralded as the golden age of Japan. The golden age, where nobody was allowed in who looked different, and what that must have felt like. Just, let's make a good story out of that. Blue Eye Samurai is a wonderful expression of the ways in which Japanese and American pop culture exist in conversation, intertwined and engaged. We said that this was an East meets West, and there was a lot of things inspired by actual Western movies, Clint Eastwood type things, that we wanted to bring that energy to Mizu. Nozumi explains.
You will tell me who sold you that gun.
That influence is reflexive. It extrapolates Western iconography into a samurai setting, when that Western iconography was itself derived from samurai films. Let's talk about Clint Eastwood, the actor explicitly cited by Nozumi. Clint Eastwood's big break as a movie star was in A Fistful of Dollars, a spaghetti western that was one of several American remakes of Akira Kurosawa's samurai epic Yojimbo. Of course, Yojimbo was itself heavily influenced by Kurosawa's affection for the westerns made by John Ford, and was adapted from a Dashiell Hammett novel, Red Harvest. It's notable as only Kurosawa's third film to shoot in a widescreen aspect ratio, and it uses that in the same way that westerns do to create a sense of space between the characters. Many of Kurosawa's Japanese films were heavily influenced by American genres, and then in the years afterwards went on to exert their own influence on those same genres. Look, you don't need me to tell you that George Lucas's Star Wars is a loose remake of Akira Kurosawa's Hidden Fortress. The cycle is perpetual and ongoing. It's a feedback loop of inspiration and creativity. Eastwood broke out as a star in a remake of a samurai classic. Decades later, his revisionist western Unforgiven would be remade as a samurai film starring Ken Watanabe. Indeed, these genres are just part of the lingua franca of modern pop culture, to the point that Quentin Tarantino can make Kill Bill as a fusion of the Asian martial arts film and the American western. Of course, this relationship is more complicated than simple cultural exchange. There are more loaded issues involved, particularly as they relate to colonialism and imperialism, not to mention the specific context of Japanese history. Although Blue Eye Samurai is critical of the closed-mindedness of the feudal Japanese culture that it depicts, it's also skeptical of Western involvement in Japanese politics. Abijah Fowler, the only white man in Japan in the show, is portrayed as a complete monster who seeks to destroy, or perhaps befoul, if you will, the local culture. Indeed, Blue Eye Samurai owes a lot to Yojimbo, particularly its interest in the importation of firearms into Japan as an expression of Western imperialism.
A gun will never be as beautiful as a sword, but with a gun you can take any sword you want.
This link between guns and colonialism is central to Blue Eye Samurai from its opening scenes. The show's opening confrontation between Mizu and Hashiman the Flesh Trader is driven by the fact that he is a pistol in a culture that has banned trade with outsiders. Kurosawa's Yojimbo served as a commentary on the social decay of contemporary Japan, reflecting a moment when decaying values have lost their universal acceptances and new modes have neither clearly emerged nor fully displaced the old. Film historian Stephen Prince argues that Yojimbo tied Japan's opening to the West in the 19th century to Japan's post-war economic rise, warning about the high costs of eschewing cultural values like thrift and frugality in favor of materialism and consumption. Quick sidebar here. It's worth noting that this anxiety also cut both ways, and yes, that is also a sword pun. As Japan emerged as an economic powerhouse, American pop culture seemed increasingly uneasy with the influence that Japan exerted in the world. You can see this through most of the 80s and into the early 90s, in the background of movies like Blade Runner, in the premise of movies like Black Rain. It's explicitly stated in Die Hard.
Pearl Harbor didn't work out, so we got you with tape decks.
Even just through the lens of pop culture, America and Japan have a very complicated dynamic. End sidebar. Of course, Kurosawa was making movies during the American occupation of Japan in the wake of the Second World War. Many of his non-samurai films of the period, such as Stray Dog and Drunken Angel, grapple with this directly. In fact, it's worth taking a moment to consider the movie Ikiru, one of Kurosawa's wonderful humanist masterpieces. It tells the story of a public servant who's diagnosed with a terminal illness who decides to construct a children's playground as a lasting monument and legacy. However, it's also worth acknowledging in the specific context of Japan in the period that, as Michael Lucan notes in Imitation and Creativity in the Japanese Arts, Tokyo had 182 children's playgrounds before the Second World War. After the American firebombing in 1945, only 82 remained. As such, the construction of this childhood playground isn't just an act of redemption and service. It's a way of dealing with the consequences of the Second World War. That context is often watched when these movies are revisited today, decades away from their original release. In Blue Eye Samurai, Fowler uses his firearms to stage a coup against Shogun Ito. During a climactic confrontation with Mizu, Fowler reduces Ito, which he described as the biggest city in the world, to ash. The city burns as a result of Western munitions and technical innovation, which is somewhat loaded imagery in the context of the history between Japan and the West. Fowler blames the Shogun for letting him in the first place.
A small crack in the wall. All that vision, you couldn't see how little space a bullet needs.
This all gets the complicated and charged relationship between Japan and America. It's not a simple binary. That's worth noting that Kurosawa did something himself to increase the influence of American pop culture on Japan. As Charles Silver explains, it would be hard to overstate the impact of the importation to the West, and particularly to America, of Akira Kurosawa's 1950 film Rashomon, which opened up a whole new cinematic world to moviegoers. As befitting a samurai show, the show returns repeatedly to the metaphor of the forge, focusing on those beautiful swords fashioned from metal. Mizu trains with a blind swordsmith, Master Iji. She speaks of herself like a sword being forged.
No amount of hammering can remove my impurity.
However, during a confrontation with Fowler, Mizu's perfectly forged sword breaks.
It was too pure. The metal wants to be blended with new steel.
Strongest sword is a blend of steel. Soft and hard.
Pure and impure.
Blue Eye Samurai suggests that purity is a myth and a delusion. After all, there's an inherent irony in placing the blue eyes associated with an Aryan ideal in a context where they become something uncanny or other. The show suggests that impurity can be a virtue, embracing a willingness to let ideas cross-pollinate between cultures. The season's 6th episode, for example, heavily features a Japanese cover of Metallica's For Whom the Bell Tolls, a striking illustration of hybridization across cultures. Blue Eye Samurai is a child of two different worlds, and it's all the more beautiful for that. I've been Darren Mooney, and this was The Backdrop.